back to Winning Isn't Easy. We're here with our special guest, Shannon, who is a nurse consultant in uh, the legal context. And we're going to delve into the not so wonderful world of independent medical evaluations. So, first off, can you tell me what suggestions do you have for a client to prepare for an independent medical evaluation? Because they've never had an independent medical evaluation. They've seen their physician with whom they have a trusting relationship, but now they're going to be sent off to a stranger who will ultimately have an impact on whether they get their benefits or whether they continue to get their benefits. So, what suggestions do you have for a client to prepare for an IME?
Okay, so the suggestions that we would have, or what we would typically do, is, of course, review the medical records to have familiarity with their medical history to ensure the accurate and consistency during the examination. Understanding the purpose of the IME, knowing that the examination is conducted by a physician hired by the insurance company, and can help also set appropriate expectations. It's about being, honest, consistent, providing truthful and consistent answers to the examiner, and avoid any unnecessary information, and answering directly without volunteering additional details that may not be relevant. Also, a consultation, like I had mentioned, meeting with their attorney, or, actually having usually, I would say around a 10 to 15 minute phone call to prep, or however much time that they need before the independent examination.
So let me ask you this, and I have two minds of the answer to this question. Do you think that a person who's going to be undergoing an IME should be reviewing their medical records, or is that something that just you and the attorney should be doing?
Well, I definitely think it's important for the client to review that, to be fresh on their mind, to once again give clear, concise information, but not offer any information that is not relevant, that isn't directly related to the independent medical exam.
So, as I said, I'm of two minds. Sometimes I have a situation where there has a problem in the medical records. Maybe there's a lack of consistency or something just doesn't make sense. I will try to make sure that you and I have had a discussion about those particular medical records. And I may ask you to discuss that with a client, because sometimes, quite frankly, it comes better from you than it comes from me. But one of the dangers in reviewing the medical records is that I find that the client is then inclined to try to tell their story in the context of their medical records, which then leads the IME doctor to kind of cherry pick that medical history and say, well, they're not really a good historian. Do you agree with me in that situation?
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
The way I think that cases should be presented during the course of an IME is the client is not there to recite the medical history. The doctor can read. And I will tell my clients, if the doctor starts asking you about your medical records or your history, then I say, you tell them, read the medical records. The medical records tell the story of my medical condition. And if you have a specific question, I'm more than happy to answer that, because I don't want this to become a test about their memory and their medical records. Have you seen that happen before in the context of an IME?
Yes, and I think that's why it's so important to thoroughly review this beforehand, because many clients will just become very nervous, even if they were prepped, and they just forget. And a lot of times when you're nervous, you just tend to divulge unnecessary information that could hurt you or may not be accurate.
Right. I call that verbal vomit. So I warn my clients about verbal vomit. Now, let me ask you this. I, like some lawyers, have videos for different kinds of IMEs. So if it's an ortho back IME, I have professionally prepared videos that they can watch in anticipation of the IME that will give them a sense of some of the tests. But I also want my nurse consultant to have a separate discussion. So I want to use the IME sort of as a prep, and then I want my nurse to say, all right, these are the tests that are going to happen. This is the test. And by the way, if you do X, Y, or Z, that means that you're a fraud or malingering. So we don't want you to do X, Y, or Z. Do you agree with that approach, or have you seen other approaches to use of video in preparing a person for their IME?
I have not seen that very often, but while, general information and videos can provide, an overview of the process of the IME, it's more beneficial for the clients to have probably personalized guidance from their attorney or legal nurse consultant to address, specific concerns or expectations.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual IME. Many times in the context of an ERISA case, my client will walk in and the doctor says, well, here's all sorts of forms to fill out, including a medical history, to which I say, that's not an IME and you're not going to fill out forms. Sometimes they will cancel the IME. Sometimes they will go forward. So let me ask you this. Have you observed IME providers asking the clients to fill out the forms? And if so, what have you told the person to do or not do?
So there's typically in the demand a list of objections and things that cannot be done or asked, which I would review with the client prior to this. And if the physician does cross that line, I object. And that is something that I'm going to put and include in my report. And generally speaking, I'll object and we move on. Usually they're pretty respectful. Sometimes you won't get some that are so respectful in that manner, but just to, stop that process, because like we were just discussing before, these clients get very nervous and they forget everything that they probably have discussed with you. So you're there to, not be biased, but support and carry that along.
Get them back on track.
Yeah, back on track. Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the IME provider will ask for diagnostic studies. And I, of course, as part of my knows you can't do, unless it's like a neuropsych eval where they're going to do testing, I object and say, if you want x-rays, we'll go get the x-rays and then you can look at them. Have you experienced that where an IME provider wants to do some form of diagnostic testing, and what happens when there's an objection?
Most of the IMEs that I've been in, it outlines it. So I take a copy of the demand civil code of procedure, just in case the physician, we know that they have it. They have all of those diagnostics and usually the medical history. It's going to be an objection or, well, would you like to review this copy again? I brought an extra copy for you. And that usually just stops it right there.
So you made an interesting point there. Sometimes my clients say, I want to go to this IME and I want to bring the doctor my box of medical records. And I say, hell no. The reason I say that is it's not our job to educate the IME provider. More often than not, in my experience, what I see is that the IME doctor doesn't have the medical records and has a nurse summary done by the insurance company or plan's nurse. What is your experience with doctors having the medical records or summary and the client's thought that they want to come in and supplement the doctor's chart with their entire medical records?
Well, I have not had that happen. If that were the case, I always have the client, I'm in very close contact up into the IME to meet me before we go in the front door, even to check in. I'm there with them from the very start and recording and to the very end. So, we're there to really guide them and, be an advocate in the sense of the process and doing it correctly. And not letting them, self, unknowingly injure. I'm sorry.
Sabotage, right?
Sabotage. Yes. Thank you. The case. So, it's never ever come to that. And I haven't really had a client try to actually do that, but I could see where that could happen.
So, Shannon, tell us how you go about recording what happens in the course of this evaluation. Are you taking notes? Are you audio recording it? What are you doing?
What I'm doing is I'm auto recording it from the moment that we walk into the office, check in the waiting room until we go back. Usually it's not a very long wait. If nobody's discussing anything, of course, I'm not going to necessarily record just silence. And then recording basically until we're in that room. I know that every part of the examination is done and we're about to walk out. And then I also take notes while I'm recording, and I have just different diagrams to, take down some notes. So I'm doing it in various ways so I don't miss any piece of information, pertinent information, and write a very concise, thorough report.
So obviously one of the most important parts of the evaluation is not only the actual evaluation in terms of testing, but I see physicians asking questions about what the person does in terms of activity of daily living. And they're comparing and contrasting that to forms that the claimant has filled out in the course of their case called daily activity statements or statement of activities. So talk to us about how you think a patient client should be asking questions or answering questions about ADLs. Obviously, it's got to be an honest answer, but what suggestions do you have for how they should go about answering that kind of question?
Just basically not giving a extended amount of information, just being very 1 to 2 words, one sentence, and exactly what they asked. You don't need to go into details.
So one of the things I tell my clients is think about this good days, bad days. In other words, on a good day, I can do X, but then I pay for it, and this is how I pay for it. And on a bad day, this is what I can and cannot do. So I don't like pain scales of 0 to 10. Mm-hmm. I don't like averages. I like the good days and bad days approach. What do you think about that as a way to answer questions about activities of daily living?
I think in a layman's term for the client to understand it, I think that keeps it very simple and answers the question appropriately. I really do like that approach.
So as you well know, disability insurance companies and plans aggressively use surveillance. And I'm not suggesting to anybody who's listening to this that in fact there is surveillance on you, because I don't know. But I tell my clients that when there's a not so independent medical evaluation scheduled, it's because they've either had surveillance on you and caught you doing something they think is inconsistent. They've seen something in your social media account that leads them to believe you're more active, or they're actually surveilling you the day before, the day of, and the day after this independent medical evaluation. Have you had, in the course of your experience, any discussion with a physician about surveillance, or has a physician ever suggested, well, you answered the question this way, but I've seen a surveillance report of you doing X, Y, and Z. Explain. What are your thoughts about that?
Of course that can happen with the examiner asking, when they're speaking about their daily activities. I have not had that come up in an IME, not that it could, but, the client should just be truthful about their capabilities, and inconsistencies can be detrimental to their claim.
So let's move on to another topic. Mm-hmm. You've prepared for the IME, you've met with a client, you've attended the IME. Now you're going to prepare a report. In my view, I think there are 2 reports that get prepared. One is your initial report concerning your observations of the IME and how it was conducted. So let's I'm going to stop right there and ask you that question, and I'm going to go on to a second question. Um, what do you do after the IME to memorialize what you've observed and your comments and thoughts?
Okay. So I would document a detailed, objective account of the IME, including the examiner's actions, the client's responses, and any other pertinent observations. And then a report is provided to the attorney to support the client's case.
So let's say, for example, we have an orthopedic issue. You and I both know that under the American Academy of Orthopedics guidelines, they are supposed to be doing certain things during certain types of evaluations. I'm assuming that you are using that as a checklist in the course of the evaluation to see whether or not they're in fact doing the testing that they should be doing. Is that correct?
Yes, we would also notate that.
And then when you're doing your report, are you commenting on the testing that they did and what was observed? And are you also commenting on the testing that they should have done but didn't do?
Yes, on both.
Okay. There are some times where my clients will report back to me and say, oh, the doctor said I was really disabled and I couldn't do my job. And of course, you get a report that says something completely different. Do you note in your report those kinds of comments by physicians about their observations or thoughts about a person's ability to work or whether they're disabled or not?
Well, I typically record the entire session, so it's on record. And, if those are type of questions that could be objected, I would immediately object that.
So let me ask the second question, and that is, we get the IME report, and sometimes I think IME reports are great works of fiction because what allegedly happened during the IME is not consistent with what the doctor's report says. Mm-hmm. So do you ultimately review the physician's report and comment on the report, what occurred in the exam, what didn't occur during the exam, any comments or conclusions that the physician reached that you think are wrong?
I mean, if I'm provided that information and asked by that attorney to do that, absolutely we can. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally something I always do because if there's a conclusion in this report that isn't consistent with my nurse's observations or what my client told me, then I want my nurse to comment on that. If the physician has said that in their report they did a test that they didn't do, is that something that you think you as a nurse consultant should be commenting on, and what impact that might have had on the physician's conclusions?
Yes, because we're there to critically review, the IME report to identify those inaccuracies or omissions. If discrepancies are found, such as a test being documented that was not performed, and highlight these issues to challenge the credibility of the report.
I have one other question before we take a break, and I've had this happen a couple times, and once was when we are actually videotaping. So instead of a nurse, we were allowed to videotape the exam, except for the physician put his butt, if you will, between the camera. And so here's the camera, here's his rear end, and here's the patient, so that the camera only was able to have a 15-minute view of his rear end. Have you ever had something like that happen? And if so, how should that be addressed by a nurse? In other words, the physician is interfering with your observation of the evaluation.
I will bring it to everybody's attention to basically take a pause that I am not able to see or hear clearly what's going on. I will quickly adjust where I need to go and either reposition myself depending on what type of room. I mean, because it can vary quite a bit, but I want to be able to get the most accurate, detailed information looking at, the examiner and the client as well. So, even if it's a recording and it's not being videoed, I would do the exact same thing.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we've covered a ton of information in this section, so let's take a break and we will be back in a second.